Welcome to Energy Reactions in the Cell.
Part 2.
This section is subtitled Fun with Photosynthesis. Now, before going on and watching the video, make sure that you're still familiar with everything that we did in the last video. In other words, you should be familiar with ATP and how it works, various electron and hydrogen carriers. You should be able to go ahead and give the definition and summary equation for photosynthesis. You should know about chlorophyll and its importance, and all the parts of a chloroplast. We're going to be looking at how photosynthesis actually works. So, for each of the two important reactions associated with photosynthesis, you'll have to know the following. 1. Hey, where do they occur? What important structures in the chloroplast are involved? Secondly, what important reactants or starting materials must be available? And what products are you going to end up with? You should also be able to describe both processes with or without the aid of a flowchart or diagram. The first set of reactions are called light-dependent reactions. Now, the entire process of photosynthesis is still much the same as we said earlier. That is, we're going to use light energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into useful food molecules, such as simple sugars, glucose. But we want to go a little bit deeper here and see how this actually happens. To do this, we have to go ahead and look at two important sets of reactions. The first ones are called light-dependent reactions because, guess what? They need light energy. Now, these light-dependent reactions occur in the grana, specifically within the thylakoids, those little discs within the grana that contain chlorophyll, or the light-collecting molecules. Now, they also have a whole bunch of other stuff in there that allows sets of reactions to occur. What you need for the light-dependent reactions, then, are, of course, light, water, NADP, and some ADP, and some free phosphates, so we can make ATP later. What actually happens here? Well, the light energy is used to split water apart. When that happens, you end up with hydrogen ions, electrons, and oxygen. Oxygen is just going to be released as a waste here. But the high-energy electrons are going to be used in a series of reactions which will help form ATP molecules. Thus, we're going to use the light energy here to be converted into a form of chemical energy, ATP. Those high-energy electrons are also going to be used to help convert NADP into NADPH. And the NADPH is going to carry that hydrogen in the next set of reactions. All right, so here are the details of the light-dependent reactions. We can look at this as a diagram of a chloroplast. Here's the grana, which are just stacks of thylakoids. And what we're going to do is we're going to pump in some water, just regular old plain water. And then we're going to go ahead and use light energy to go ahead and split that water apart. When that happens, you're going to end up with oxygen, which will eventually just leave the chloroplast and eventually the cell as a waste. We're going to end up with some hydrogen ions, and we're going to end up with some electrons. Now, the electrons, or the energy from this electron, or these electrons, are going to be used to convert ADP and phosphate into ATP, and we're going to use this as an energy source later. We're going to need that hydrogen as well. So we're going to need somebody to carry that hydrogen. So NADP is going to join in, grab a hold of the hydrogen, again with the help of those electrons, to form NADPH. And, yeah, we haven't really made any glucose yet. However, we've set the stage for what comes next, which will allow us to make glucose. Now, one of your ultimate goals is to be able to explain this process, and there's some steps involved, so this does take a little bit of practice. Now, you can go ahead and describe it just in paragraph form or list form. You can go ahead and draw a diagram like we just did, or you can have a flow chart similar to what we have here. But try not to just go ahead and memorize just disconnected facts. Make sure that you're able to trace through the whole process. To do this, practice explaining it as you draw it. Sometimes this helps a lot with helping you remember what's going on. So, hey, start from scratch. You know that it happens in the grana. You know that you're going to need water, and you know you're going to need light energy to break apart that water. What are you going to get? Well, one of the things that's in water is oxygen. Oxygen just leaves as a waste. You know that oxygen is a waste in photosynthesis. But, hey, there's also hydrogen and electrons. Well, those electrons are going to be used to help convert ADP and a free phosphate into ATP. Again, we're going to use this ATP energy later. We're also going to need the hydrogen later if we want to make a glucose molecule. So we're going to need someone to carry it. NADP comes and picks up the hydrogen, and now we have NADPH. We're not worried about numbers here. The numbers get a little bit confusing when we start really pumping them in. So just worry about what happens. Again, start out with a blank piece of paper. Explain it over and over again. And eventually, things will start to fall into place for you. Well, the whole purpose of photosynthesis is to try and make food molecules, and in those light-dependent reactions, we didn't make any food molecules. All we did was break apart water. So we need another set of reactions to actually make the food, make the glucose. This happens without the use of light energy. Therefore, it's called light independent. It's also referred to as the Calvin cycle reactions because a guy named Calvin figured this out, got a Nobel Prize for it. Kind of cool. Now, these reactions, this set of reactions, don't require any special structures, just the appropriate enzymes. And they occur out in the stroma. What you need for these reactions? Well, you'll need an energy source, but you're not going to use light. You're going to use ATP. We're going to use a hydrogen source to make glucose. Remember glucose, right? Formula for glucose, C6H12O6. There's a lot of hydrogen there. Well, the hydrogen is going to be supplied by NADPH. But we also need a carbon source and an oxygen source. And lo and behold, we can get that from CO2. Thus, ATP is used as an energy source to break apart the CO2 and help build the glucose. Hydrogen from the NADPH is used to combine with CO2, and we get, as a result, glucose, C6H12O6. Now, what's really cool is at the end, you also have some leftovers. You've got NADP, which can be used over again, back in the light-dependent reactions. And once ATP uses its energy, it becomes ADP, which again can be used in the light-dependent reactions. So the two sets of reactions are actually connected. Okay, back to a quick diagram. Here's our chloroplast again, and we're not going to be looking at thylakoids or grana here. We're going to be out here in the stroma. This is where the Calvin cycle reactions or the light-independent reactions are going to be occurring. So we'll just go ahead and put CC here for Calvin cycle. Ooh, cool. It also stands for cross country. I love it. Anyway, in the last set of reactions, we did generate some ATP. And that ATP is going to be our energy source for this set of reactions. We want to build a glucose molecule, and you can't build glucose without some hydrogen, but we had some NADPH carrying some hydrogen from the water. Well, you're also going to need CO2 because you need a carbon source and you need an oxygen source if you want to build a glucose molecule. Well, here in the Calvin cycle reactions, we're going to use energy from ATP to break apart CO2, strip off the hydrogens from NADPH, and build glucose. So, again, from CO2, we've got our carbon source, and we can eventually go ahead and link up 6 of these. From our NADPH, we have our hydrogen source, and we're eventually going to go ahead and strip off 12 of these. And we're going to use some oxygen from CO2. And thus we've got glucose. And again, like I said, the cool thing is when NADPH gives up its hydrogen, we've got NADP again, which can go right back into the light-dependent reactions. And when ATP gives up its energy, you have ADP with a free phosphate, and that can go back into the light-dependent reactions. So in actuality, we can go ahead and link these two together. All right, just as before, this is going to take some independent practice to get down. But don't merely memorize a list. Don't try and memorize disconnected parts of a flowchart or a diagram. Make sure you're able to explain your way through it. Again, the Calvin cycle reactions, or light-independent reactions, occur out in the stroma. Our purpose here is to make a glucose molecule, so we're going to need a carbon source and an oxygen source. So we're going to pump in some CO2. Now, glucose also has some hydrogen in it, so we're going to need a hydrogen source. Well, the hydrogen is going to be carried by NADPH. If I can write it. But in order to go ahead and build a glucose molecule from these things, we're going to have some energy to help out. Well, that's going to come from ATP. ATP supplies the energy to go ahead and rip apart CO2, strip off the hydrogen down here, and we can eventually make a glucose molecule with our carbons, our hydrogens, and our oxygen. NADPH no longer has its hydrogen, so now we have normal everyday run-of-the-mill NADP, and that can contribute to the light-dependent reactions. ATP, when it gives off its energy, you're really left with ADP and a free phosphate, and that also can be used in the light-dependent reactions. So if you want to, you can take this flowchart and the previous flowchart and put them side by side, because the reactions actually occurred as couple reactions. Yep, another practice quiz. And it is just practice. So if you need to go ahead and check the video again, check your notes, feel free. But make sure that you're able to go ahead and do this quiz without notes by the time you're ready to do the real quiz. Couple things. First off, Doofus made a mistake here. On number 6, that should be products. Sorry. And then when you get down here to 7, you don't necessarily have to use a flow chart. You can do some other type of a diagram or even just a paragraph. However, make sure you're explaining what happens. If you are doing a flow chart or a diagram, don't just put arrows in without any explanation. Tell me what the arrows mean. What's going on with those arrows? You have to really explain the process. Okay? Anyway, good luck. Have fun with it, or as much fun as you can. And I guess I'll talk to you next time.